All right, the big family we're going to talk about now are the Picorna viruses. I want you to follow this name of the family with me. Pico means small. You have Pico, RNA, viridae. These are small RNA viruses, and the name tells you what you need to know. These are mostly what we call enteroviruses. And what's unique about what I'm about to tell you is that while they use the fecal-oral route as their means of transmission, they don't cause gastroenteritis. So they're enteroviruses not because they cause gastroenteritis, but because they're transmitted fecal-oral. They're naked viruses and extremely stable. They're stable at low pH, which is what allows them to be transmitted fecal-oral, and they're resistant, again, because they are non-enveloped. Now, if you want to split them up into genera, another genus in this family are the rhinoviruses. And these are the less stable of the family, so they will get chewed up in acid, and they do prefer cooler temperatures. Rhinoviruses prefer to grow at 33. Now, what does that tell you? One of the things it tells you is that a lot of times with rhinoviruses, and there are hundreds and hundreds of serotypes of, but you usually get infection, we call it a head cold, right? Because the infection usually stays in the nasal mucosa. Part of the reason is because it likes the cooler temperatures. Now, what did your grandma or your parents used to do for you when you got sick like that? They used to make you what? Chicken soup, right? And they would swear. They would swear to you that that was going to make you better. And you know what? With rhinoviruses, they weren't lying. Because as you're bending down, sipping up the soup, you're inhaling all of that steam. And the steam is going to limit the replication of the virus, okay? So it's not actually what you're ingesting that's helping you. In that case, it's actually the steam that you're breathing in. Picornavirus is hepatitis A virus, again, that we talked about earlier, so we're not going to talk about it again here. Now, the virus-specific viruses we're going to mention here are the polioviruses, Coxsackie A and B, and briefly we'll mention some of the other viruses. Now, what we did was create a nice table for you to talk about some of the different viruses. Now, polioviruses are probably one of the scariest viruses in this family. We have eradicated, though, polio, at least from North America, but we still see epidemics of it around the world. This virus is transmitted through fecal-oral transmission, and the specific target are the anterior horn motor neurons. And it's a lytic virus, so it's going to destroy those neurons. What's interesting about poliovirus is a good percentage of individuals who came in contact with poliovirus when it was epidemic in the U.S. back in, let's say, the 30s and 40s were asymptomatic. Then a smaller percentage of individuals got fever of unknown origin. A few individuals got aseptic meningitis because all of the enteroviruses are capable of causing aseptic meningitis, basically meaning non-bacterial meningitis. Then a very small percent, although it didn't seem like it during the epidemic, got paralytic polio. Paralytic polio is a flaccid paralysis, but there's no sensory loss. Now, I'm going to tell you a personal story here. My mother actually got polio when she was 2 years old, right before the vaccine came out, all right? And in talking to my grandmother about the disease, I said, do you remember what happened when Mom got polio? She said, yeah, Kim, it was horrible. She was sick for a few days. I thought she had a cold, and all of a sudden she had trouble walking. And my mom spent much of her childhood in hospitals because of the paralysis. She had all kinds of surgeries. Really, looking back at the medical records, you really can't even tell what was done. But she didn't have the most severe form. The most severe form of polio was called bulbar poliomyelitis that caused paralysis of the respiratory muscles. Now, this was before we had respirators and ventilators, and those children back in the polio epidemic were in these huge wards of iron lungs. So you'd see the kid, and all you'd see is their head sticking out, and they were in this long, basically metal tube that was breathing for them, and most of them died within those iron lungs. So it was a horrible, horrible disease. Now, what was one of the medical miracles in the U.S. And around the world was really the advent of the vaccines. And we have two different vaccines for polio. We have the live vaccine, which is called the Sabin vaccine, and we have the killed vaccine, which is the Salk vaccine. We used to only use the live vaccine because it gave you the best immunity. You would take it on a little sugar cube, ingest it, the virus would replicate in your gut, and you would get really good protective immunity in IgA. In fact, because it's fecal oral, you would actually shed the vaccine strain of the virus, and you could actually protect other people if there was fecal oral contamination. We only now use the Salk vaccine in the U.S., and here's why. We have now eradicated polio from the U.S. You would have more of a chance to get polio if you were given the live vaccine. We'd have a higher chance over than we gave you nothing at all. So because of that, we only use the killed vaccine in the U.S. Okay, so that's an important point. The next virus we're going to talk about is Coxsackie A. Coxsackie A, remember, all these viruses are fecal oral, and the one serotype I want you to remember is A16. Remember, all of these viruses can cause acute aseptic meningitis, and there are two diseases I want to point out that are really clinically relevant for Coxsackie A. And the first is hand, foot, and mouth disease. So in hand, foot, and mouth disease, the kids kind of feel flu-like, achy, and they have vesicles where? On their hands, their feet, and their mouth. Okay? Hand, foot, and mouth disease. The other disease I want to point out here specifically is something called herp angina, where it's a Coxsackie A virus, and you get vesicular lesions in the mouth and oropharynx. It's called herp angina, but you have to know it's not due to a herpes virus. So herpes viral drugs will not work for Coxsackie A. Okay? So I have hand, foot, and mouth, herp angina, aseptic meningitis. Those are the big three clinically relevant diseases you need to worry about for Coxsackie A. There are no vaccines, so best mechanism of protection for anything that's fecal oral is going to be hand washing. All right, the next virus we're going to talk about is Coxsackie B. Again, can cause aseptic meningitis, but the two top diseases, I guess, we think about with Coxsackie B. Number one, myocarditis. If you are reading a vignette on USMLE Step 1, and we have a relatively healthy young person that develops myocarditis, typically it's viral myocarditis, and it's due to Coxsackie B. Okay, so that's the first thing. The other disease caused by Coxsackie B is called the devil's grip, or Bornholm's disease. In this case, you have severe intercostal pain, where it feels like, I guess it got its name because it feels like the devil was just coming down and gripping your entire body. So you had really intense intercostal pain and fever, and that is called the devil's grip. So those are probably the top two, again, that you need to know from Coxsackie B. And again, we have no specific treatment or prevention for Coxsackie B. The last virus you see listed here are the echoviruses. And what you'll see with the echoviruses is nothing really specific, all right? But they tend to cause non-specific rash. So you'll get FUO, fever of unknown origin, but it's usually accompanied with a rash. So we'll say fever and rash of unknown origin. Probably least likely of all of the Picorna viruses to show up on the USMLE. Why? Because they say it right on the slide, unknown origin. So how are they going to expect you to know it? Okay, so that one's fairly low yield over all of the others. All right, the other viruses we're going to talk about, we mentioned already. We talked a little bit already about rhinoviruses. I said that There's hundreds of serotypes. So what that translates into is you never actually develop immunity, because the next time you're going to get the cold, you're probably going to get infected with another serotype. And one thing you need to remember is the cellular receptor for rhinoviruses, which is ICAM1. Okay? So what you need to know about the disease for rhinovirus is it's the most common cause of the common cold. Are there treatments and prevention? No, not really. Okay? And then, of course, last on the list here is hepatitis A, which we talked about when we did our general discussion on all of the hepatitis viruses. Keeping in mind, again, just like the majority of members of this virus family, it's fecal-oral spread. And while we do have a vaccine, so you can give a vaccine if you're traveling to an endemic area, we also have hyperimmune serum that we can give, so we can passively immunize someone that's immune compromised.